This is the Insta360 GPS Preview Remote, which, yes, I purchased with my own money, so let's do a completely honest and unbiased review. So let's see what's good, what's not so good, and is it worth its hefty price tag? Stick around and let's find out. Hello and welcome. So today we're going to be taking a closer look at the Insta360 GPS Preview Remote. Now this is the third generation remote from Insta360 and I actually still own all three generations. The first generation GPS remote I used for my 1X2. The second generation GPS Action remote, which is currently still available, I used it on my X3, but it is compatible with pretty much all current Insta360 cameras, with one notable exception, and that is the X4. And that brings us to the third generation and latest remote from Insta360, the GPS Preview Remote. Now this is compatible with the X4, it is also compatible with the Ace and Ace Pro, and I'm hoping that that will be expanded to include additional cameras, particularly the Go 3 and Go 3S. Now the GPS Preview Remote has a pretty hefty price tag of $150, which is almost double the price of the GPS Action Remote. But of course, for that additional price, you are getting more functionality. The question is, do you really need that functionality? And that's what we're going to be looking at today. We're going to see what's good, what's maybe not so good, and try to figure out if this is something that's worth adding to your kit, or maybe if you should just go for the GPS Action Remote instead. Now there's quite a bit to cover here, so as usual I'm going to place the chapters up here and on the video timeline. And just to emphasize before we get into it, this video is not sponsored, paid for, influenced in any way. I purchased all of the equipment with my own money and the opinions are entirely my own. And of course, if you enjoy the video, please remember to give us a like and consider subscribing to the channel for a lot more similar content. So let's get on with it. Okay, let's start out by looking at what comes in the box. So obviously we have the remote itself, we have a charging cradle, we have two different holders for the remote, one which is designed as a wrist strap for wearing it like a watch, and the other one has a much smaller strap, as you can see here, which is designed for putting it onto a selfie stick, the handlebars of a bike, or something similar. In addition to the instructions, we also have these double-sided sticky pads, and we'll talk more about those in just a second. So starting then with the remote itself, as you can see, it is very compact. If I put it alongside an Apple Watch, you can get an idea of the size. This is the larger size Apple Watch. As you can see, the Preview Remote is a little bit larger and a little bit thicker, but overall it is very small and compact, weighing in at just 44 grams, or a little bit more than 1.5 ounces. The design is very simplistic. As you can see, there are just two buttons on the top. We have a power button and a record button, and everything else is done through the touch screen, which is 40 millimeters diagonally, or just over 1.5 inches, and we'll see all that in operation in just a moment. On the side of the remote there is a speaker, and on the back of the remote is a connector which is used for charging. Now what's interesting is that this has a 4-pin connector, whereas the charger only has 2 pins, so perhaps there is additional functionality coming by way of this connector. If we look at the charger, as you can see, they have opted for this cradle type charger. It is not wireless charging, it relies on the contact of the pins. There is a magnet which pulls the pins into place on the back of the connector, and it has a very nice touch, which is a display which shows you the charge status. Now overall, I'm not a fan of this solution for charging, and we'll talk more about that later on in the what's not so good section. Moving on to the two holders. First off, you have this one, which obviously is designed for wearing the remote like a watch. You simply push the remote into it. On this one, there is a cutout on the back for attaching the charger. Now, you cannot attach the charger while it's in the cradle, but this piece actually will pop out and allows you to then put it onto the back and charge it while it's in the wrist strap. To remove it, simply push it from the back. The other holder works in a similar way and allows you to attach it to a selfie stick, your handlebars, whatever. Now, the design of this one, however, does not allow for a cutout for charging. Now, also included in the box are these double-sided sticky pads, and the instructions for these state that if you're going to be using this in water, you should place a double-sided sticky pad on the back of the remote first to keep it more securely in the holder. So I guess that means that the remote can easily pop out of here when this is wet, so I think that's important to know. And also, I'm not entirely convinced of these stickers as a long-term solution for that. So that's definitely something to keep an eye on. Okay, let's go through the initial setup. I am using my X4, which you can see I have powered on, ready to go. I've powered on the remote. Now, the first time you power this on, it will probably start looking immediately for the camera, but if not, all you have to do is just hit this camera icon down here and it will initiate the search. In the settings on my X4, I'm going to go to the remote, and it too begins searching for a Bluetooth remote, and after a few seconds you can see it finds it here, the preview remote. So I just select it here, and then it connects straight away, and it's as simple as that. Obviously, you only have to pair them once. Now that these two are paired, they will remain paired until you unpair them or connect with a different device. One final thing to mention in this section: when you go into the settings of your camera, you'll find a feature called Bluetooth Wake Up. Make sure this is enabled if you want to be able to power on the camera from the remote. Okay, let's talk about operating the camera using the remote. Now, if you're already familiar with operating an Insta360 camera, you will feel immediately at home. It's the same combination of a touchscreen interface combined with two buttons. You've got a record button and a power button, which also doubles as a mode selection button. Once powered on, I can use the power button to simply select between the different filming modes, or of course I can swipe on the screen in order to do the same thing. If you are controlling an X4, as I am here, you can even use the touch screen to change your camera direction just as you can on the device itself. Swiping in from the right hand side takes you to the settings for your filming, so you can adjust your exposure compensation, your shutter speed, you can choose auto, manual, change the colors exactly as you can on the camera itself. Similarly, if you just tap down here, you can change your resolution, your frame rate, and any other parameters depending on what mode you are currently shooting in. Now, that is pretty much where the similarities end. On the camera, of course, if you swipe from the left, you access your library of videos and pictures. That is not available, of course, on the remote. And on the camera, if you swipe down from the top, you access the camera settings. Whereas with the remote, if you swipe down from the top, you get to a number of displays which include settings, but not for the camera. These are the settings for the remote itself. There are 4 displays here, obviously a time display, so you can use this like a watch. You have a current speed display, you have a compass display, and you have settings, which, as I mentioned, are for the remote and not for the camera. Now, I'm not going to go through all of the settings, we'll just highlight some of the key ones here. For example, camera wake up. If you enable this, when you power on the remote, it will automatically power on the camera. More on that later on. Under display, you can change the brightness, and the other one I want to cover here is orientation. You can change the orientation to any one of the 4 settings here. It will not automatically adjust the orientation depending on the position of the remote. Now, if you want to return to the preview screen, there are a couple of ways of doing it. First of all, if you are in the time display, the little camera icon here, just tap on it, it will take you back to the preview. If you are in one of the other displays, simply hitting the record button will take you back to the preview screen. It does not immediately start recording. First it takes you back to the preview screen, and then touching it again will start the recording. Now, on the subject of recording, Insta360 has a feature on the X4 which allows you to cancel the recording by holding down the record button. That same feature works on here, so if I start the recording from the remote and I just don't like what I'm recording here, I can hold down the record button and it will cancel the recording exactly the same way as you can on the camera itself. Okay, and finally let's deal with the power button. So with both devices powered on, if I hold down the power button on the remote, it brings up this choice. So I can turn off the camera, I can turn off the remote, or I can turn off both. So I will turn off both. And of course, as long as you have the Bluetooth wake enabled on the camera and the wake up camera function enabled on the remote, you can hold down the power button once again to power on the remote. This process takes quite a bit of time. I'll talk a little bit more about this later on. So after a few seconds, the remote is powered on. It then connects and wakes up the camera using Bluetooth, and after a few more seconds, it will connect to the camera. Now you will notice that even though I'm using the X4 here, it basically shows an Ace or an Ace Pro as the camera is connecting to, so hopefully that is also something they can address. And there we are connected. Now also, let's say it's not convenient for you to use the touchscreen, you can also just hold down the power button, and if you continue to hold it down, it will power off just the camera. And holding it down again will power off the remote, but it's probably a good idea to leave the remote in its standby mode as it is right now. When it's in the standby mode, Insta360 says you will get about 60 hours of battery life out of it, and of course it makes it much faster to simply wake up the camera. Now, waking up the camera does take quite a bit of time, but you can also use the quick capture mode, so if you need to start recording straight away, it will immediately power on and start recording. So my advice would be, when you're using the remote, keep it in the standby mode. Do not shut it down completely. It will be much faster to restart the camera that way. Also, you get about 60 hours of battery life as long as you're not in the preview display, as I am here. Now, in the settings, you will find, if I go under display, there are a few options here. So you have, first of all, auto sleep, which I currently have set to 10 seconds. You can set it to whatever you want, including never. I'll leave it on 10 seconds. You also have tap to light up the screen, and you can also have the display come on when you raise your wrist, much like you can with an Apple Watch. However, it's important to know that the sleep function only works when you are in one of these displays. If you are in the live preview, this display will not go to sleep. You must be in one of these displays in order for the sleep to take effect. Once it's gone to sleep, as we mentioned, either raising your wrist or just tapping the display will turn the display back on again. Okay, the first thing we're going to be testing in performance is the range. Now, Insta360 claims a range of 8 meters for the live view and up to 20 meters for continued remote operation of the camera. So what I'll do is I'll slowly back away and you guys can judge for yourselves if you still have effective live view. Now, right now I am at around about 4 meters or 12 feet away from the camera, and if I keep going back and I keep making movements, presumably you can still see that I am moving. If I move the camera around, you should be able to see this live. I am now 24 feet away from the camera, just slightly below the 8-meter mark. So if I continue to head back, maybe I'll get to around about 30 feet here. So this is beyond the specified range of the live view. Are you still able to see as I pan around? So the next thing I want to look at is the response time. Now, in some initial testing, I've been pretty impressed with the response time, but let's see what you guys think. So basically, if something happens in front of the lens, for example, if I cover the lens, you can see on the display of the camera, it's pretty much instantaneous that you see this. And there's a very short delay until you actually see it on the remote. But how will this be affected as I increase the distance between the camera and the remote? So let's head back a little bit and I'll go to around about 12 feet away from the camera, around about 4 meters, and cover, uncover, cover, uncover. Do you see any increase in the delay? Let's head back once again and I'll go back to around about 24 feet here and again cover, uncover, cover, uncover. Are you seeing an increase in the delay now that I'm further away? So, as far as the live preview is concerned, I was able to confirm the 8-meter range. Even at 10 meters, it continued to work, but I do think we saw a couple of stutters in there. But as I said, we confirmed the 8-meter claimed specification. And as I also mentioned, I was pretty impressed by how responsive it is. Even at that 8-meter range, you could see there was only a very short delay between something happening on the camera and seeing it on the remote. Now, if you venture much beyond the 8-meter mark, you will lose the live preview, but the remote operation of the camera will continue to work. According to Insta360, it will work up to 20 meters away. Now, I didn't measure it specifically, but I'm pretty sure I got close to that 20 meters away, and even with walls and other obstructions between the camera and the remote, I was able to maintain the connection to the camera and operate it. So as far as I'm concerned, I was able to validate the claims from Insta360. Next up, let's talk about the GPS performance. Now, first up, it's important to mention that in order for the remote to lock on to a GPS signal and maintain it, it is important that you maintain line of sight to the sky. If you are in a building, you are unlikely to get a good GPS signal. Even if you are inside a vehicle, you may compromise that GPS signal. As far as getting an initial GPS lock is concerned, when I had completely clear and open view to the sky, I was able to get a lock inside just a few seconds, and I mean literally 5 to 8 seconds maximum. However, when I did some further testing, I took a drive with my X4, I wore the remote on my wrist inside the car, and in that situation it took me quite a while, several minutes in fact, in order to get a GPS lock. And then looking at the results, I feel that the GPS data itself may have been somewhat compromised by having the remote inside the vehicle with no direct view of the sky. If you compare the GPS speed with the vehicle's speedometer, you'll notice that they go in and out of synchronization. When they're in sync, you also notice that the GPS data is actually about a second or so ahead of the vehicle speedometer. Next up, let's talk battery life. Now, Insta360 says that with the live view enabled, the battery life is up to 6 hours, and if you are in the standby mode, you can get up to 60 hours of operation out of the remote. Now, I will say I thought that 6 hours of live preview was pretty optimistic for such a tiny device, so I set up a test setup. I plugged in the camera to AC power, connected the remote to live view, and just let it run. And sure enough, it was 6 hours and 14 minutes before I received a low battery warning. And about 2 minutes later, the remote shut down. But I was able to confirm that you can get 6 hours of live preview time out of this remote. Now, as far as the standby time is concerned, I did not get 60 hours out of my remote. I got about 48 hours before it shut down, but I do have to admit that I did use the remote during those 48 hours. I woke it up periodically, I went into the menus, I even connected to the camera briefly 3 or 4 times during that 48-hour period. So I would say technically, it's probably possible to get 60 hours of standby time if you don't do anything at all with the remote, but if you're not planning to do anything with remote, why have it in standby mode? You may as well just shut it down. So while 60 hours might be possible in real-world situations where you're actually using the remote periodically, it's probably going to be something more like 1 to 2 days of battery life, which, as far as I'm concerned, is really good. If we compare that to the previous generation remote, the best I could get out of this remote is around about 9 hours of battery life, and that's with minimal interaction with the camera. But even with frequent use, you're going to get quite a few hours of use out of this remote, which, as long as you start with a fully charged battery, is going to be plenty for whatever you're doing. But here's the thing, with this remote, on several occasions I was using it to start and stop recordings while driving, and then I neglected to turn it off. So the next time I went to pick up the remote to use it, of course the battery was drained. So I really appreciate the new standby mode of the GPS Preview Remote because it will prevent something like that from happening. So let me just start out this section by saying that I really do like this product, but there are a few things that definitely need to be improved. Unfortunately, I think most of these complaints are things that will require a new product, but the first complaint I have is something which I think should easily be fixable with a firmware update to the current product, and that is that the sleep function does not work on the live preview screen. If you have the preview screen enabled, this will stay here, the screen will never go to sleep, and it will basically stay there until the battery is drained after around about 6 hours. Now, this is a pretty strange one to me because if you look at pretty much every Insta360 camera, there is a sleep mode which will sleep the live view screen after a few seconds, but for some reason the remote does not have the same function. So this should be a pretty easy fix with a future firmware update. The second complaint is about the slow startup time. Now, when I did my review of the GPS Action Remote about a year ago, this is something I complained about then because it took about 25 seconds from the time you wake up the camera until they are connected and you're able to operate the camera through the remote. Well, with the new GPS Preview Remote, it's actually slightly worse, about 32 seconds from the time you wake up the camera until the time the live view appears and you're able to interact with the camera. Now, in fairness, there is a quick capture option when you wake up the camera that will start up the camera and immediately start recording, and it will do that within about 5 seconds. But if you don't want to start recording straight away, again, you have to wait about 30 seconds to be able to interact with the camera. Now, if you want an example of how quick the startup could be, look no further than another Insta360 product, and that is the Go 3 or Go 3S. Now, in this product, I have a camera which communicates wirelessly with the action pod, and when I hit the power button on the action pod, it powers up the action pod, wakes up the camera, and within about 5 seconds I have a live display of what the camera is seeing, and I have full interaction with the camera. That's how fast it could be. The next complaint is another one that I've mentioned before, and that is that you can only have one remote connection to an Insta360 camera. So for example, if I connect through the preview remote, I can no longer use the app, and perhaps more importantly, I cannot use a Bluetooth microphone. I have to choose between a remote or a wireless microphone. I cannot use both at the same time. Next complaint is this, the charging cradle. Guys, what were you thinking? This might have been cool 10 or 15 years ago, but for the past 10 years we've had USB-C, which is now the global standard when it comes to charging electronic devices. Pretty much every new small electronic device is chargeable using USB-C. That includes every Insta360 camera. Even the previous generation GPS remote uses USB-C. But now with the new preview remote, I have yet another charging cable that I have to carry around. And of course, if this gets damaged, lost, or I simply forget to put it in my bag when I leave, I have no way of charging my remote. Now, unfortunately, there's not a lot that can be done on the current product, but please, Insta360, on the next generation, give us USB-C charging. Now, in case you're wondering that the lack of USB-C is a way of helping to keep it waterproof, you should be aware that pretty much every Insta360 camera has USB-C and is waterproof. Even the previous generation remote has USB-C and is also waterproof. And the new one is actually not waterproof, which brings us to the next complaint. Yes, that's right. The GPS Preview Remote is not waterproof, it is water resistant, and it can handle being submerged briefly up to a depth of around about 5 feet. And again, this is a really odd decision on the part of Insta360. If you look at their range of action cameras, pretty much all of them can be used at depths of 5 meters, even 10 meters without the need for any kind of protective housing. So I really don't understand why a device which is intended to be used alongside those cameras cannot do the same thing. And let's face it, when it comes to water sports, whether it's surfing, kayaking, swimming, snorkeling, whatever the case may be, these are some of the key markets for an action camera. And again, I simply don't understand the decision to not make this at least as waterproof as the cameras they're operating. And finally, when it comes to complaints, I just want to talk a little bit about the price. Now, this is a little bit of a strange one because, frankly, when you consider all that the Preview Remote does, I think $150 isn't that bad. But the problem is, $150 is a lot of money if all you want to do is to be able to start and stop a recording remotely. Now, if you have an Ace or an Ace Pro, at least you have the option of being able to choose the GPS Action Remote at just $80. But frankly, even $80 is a lot of money for a remote shutter release. And if, like me, you have the X4, this is your only option. Frankly, it would be nice if Insta360 would come up with some better priced solution for people who simply want to start and stop recording. Similar to something like this, you can literally pick these up for about $5 on Amazon. You connect it to your smartphone and it allows you to take pictures or start and stop recordings. That's what many people want a remote to do. I just wish we could have something like this for Insta360 cameras instead of forcing users to pay $80 or even $150 for features that they simply don't need. Last year I spent $80 to buy the previous generation GPS action remote for use with my X3, and frankly I thought that was already a lot of money for a remote control. So when I saw the new GPS Preview Remote priced at $150, I thought there is no way I am paying that much money for a remote. And in fact, the only reason I did end up buying it was so I could do this review on my channel. But having tested this out and played around with it for a bit, I have to say I really do like this product. Yes, it has its flaws, but I can see this being very useful for a lot of Insta360 users. Now, it doesn't do anything that you couldn't do using the Insta360 app, but let's face it, it's not always possible or practical to pull out your smartphone and start using the app, particularly if you're doing something like skiing, surfing, biking, driving a vehicle, or even just walking around town with your camera on a selfie stick. For all those and other similar situations, the GPS Preview Remote is going to provide you pretty much full control over your camera, including a live preview, and I really do like the way they've implemented the standby mode so this thing is always ready to go when you need it. However, as I said earlier, I think many users, myself included, for the most part just want to be able to start and stop a recording, and for that purpose this thing is complete overkill. I really do wish that Insta360 would consider offering some kind of basic remote without the live preview, without the GPS, maybe even without the mode changing, just to be able to start and stop recording remotely. So that wraps it up for another video. I hope you enjoyed the video and got good information out of it. If so, please remember to give us a like. Also consider subscribing to the channel for a lot more similar content. If you have any questions, any comments, if you have suggestions for future videos, please drop those into the comment section. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching.